Okay, folks, we're going to bring it back to a plenary for the next 20 minutes or so. Jennifer is collecting your one big idea from each table. While she does that, Fiona, you were first up with, I know that you can't do two things at once there, with a question, and we'll take if there's other questions from the floor for the panel. We had a sort of an unexpected table up here that nearly resorted to boxing while you were busy working, so we might get a flavour of some of the comments from that as well, but I'll start with Fiona.
I was wanting to respond to what I thought were two parallel conversations about researcher mobility. I think there's a very big difference between forced mobility, decisions about next employment made under pressure, and supported and appropriate mobility. I think very few of us would disagree that having exposure to international best practice and cutting edge research overseas is positive and beneficial for a research career. But that's not the same as somebody hitting the end of a funding stream, having another one starting in 6 months' time and having no bridging funds and being forced to take a job that is diverting them off their career path. And I've heard Robert O'Connor speak before about the concern for the ICS and other streams of government funding where they've invested a lot in early career researchers, and then, sorry to Janet, but they lose them from what they would have considered to be their career paths because there isn't bridge funding or some alternative or maybe a 5 or 7 year fellowship available that would allow people to get to the next step and build up their own research groups.
Okay, thanks very much, Fiona. Any other comments or questions from the floor? Yuria.
Eucharia Meehan, Irish Research Council. I suppose a comment on the question. I was very interested in Dolores' comment earlier about the fact that UCD have set up a specific targeted office and initiative, and I know it's in its early stages, but I'm just wondering if she could say a little bit more about what exactly that is proposing to do, or kind of what's the scope of that and that kind of thing. And as part of that, I suppose it just even feeds off some of the discussion we had at the table here. Clearly, PhDs and postdocs are adults, but in the system we work in, they clearly have let's call it a reliance on principal investigators in the development of their careers. And I'm just wondering, in what's been set up or what's planned, what relationship the office will also have, not only with the researchers themselves, but with that constituency of principal investigators on whom those other individuals are so reliant. And just to say, I suppose it's been mentioned there actually in the last comment that there are very little opportunities for people after postdoc to develop individual careers, to apply for their own funding and that kind of thing. We are hoping that is something that will be addressed in the new strategy for research that's coming out more globally. Certainly the Council pushed very hard for that, because you could see the numbers, this massive drop off after postdoc awards, then very little until you got to PI. Hopefully that will be addressed.
And what's the status of that strategy? Eucharia?
Sorry?
When are we going to see the light of day of that strategy?
As I understand it, it went to the Cabinet subcommittee yesterday, and it will be tabled at Cabinet by the end of the month, and it probably will be launched before Christmas.
So pre-election?
Yes.
Okay.
So I suppose just to learn a little bit more, and then
Sure.
also what's the role of the PIs and any new structures or...
Very good. So I chaired the implementation of the towards the framework for researcher career in UCD, and we reported to the president and had the VP for research and innovation and the registrar. You know, it was a very high-level university management team that we reported into, and part of that I made an application as part of the overhead to employ 3 people full-time to set up an office for career development, specifically for postdocs, and there was 350 at the time, and each of them were developed. And I think we did with HR an assessment. They had something like 35 different research titles for people across the entire university. So we then amalgamated them into the career structure. Also, all applications were public on the internet, and then they meet a career development specialized person. So if you're in chemistry, now there are 6 of them. So they meet all the postdocs and people when they're being interviewed for PhD or just after, and we engage with each community that if we say chemistry requires a specific technical or quality assurance certificate, the office will actually fund that the postdocs can get that qualification, because the feedback has been that they need specific extra training that's specific for their career in industry. So actually the office now is funded to do that for every postdoc, to give them one application and does interviews and places them. We also have the industry PhD structure. There are Newman postdocs within UCD for industry people to work in industry and do postdocs or PhDs. And we have a PhD committee, structured PhD, where one of the PhD co-supervisors can be from the HSE, from policy, or from industry. And they are mentored for interviews, and they are tracked after they leave for their response. And when new people come in, so you can also skip the whole structure. They are told they can now write grants in their own name. So we've sorted all that out, which was very contentious with PIs. And that if they get a list of about 12 grants, they can become automatically a research fellow, and the grant is in their own name, or a senior research fellow, and they have a specified purpose contract for the length of the grant, so it can be 5 years or 7 years, even if they've already done a postdoc or a PhD. So, and they're encouraged and they get real meaningful. We also have an EU office for helping people to write ERC grants and do mock interviews. So altogether, there's a support of about 13 full-time career development and research funding mentors that specifically target the postdoc population.
Okay. Other questions or comments from the floor? No. Well, maybe I'll get, before Jennifer comes up to give a bit of the table feedback, there was heated disagreement amongst our panel members. And maybe just to give it, because I was saying, no, don't do that now, wait until we're in the plenary and don't rehearse it all. But we might try and revisit some of it, because I think it was quite interesting and very relevant to this whole role of the researcher. I don't know who wants to kick off, literally, first on it. Maria or Annalisa? Just to give them a flavour of some of the discussions you were having.
I mean, I think one of the discussions we were having, and I'll put Annalisa here on the spot, was about tenure and its removal. But as Robert asked, is she a tenured, professional? She is. So I think that suspends a bit of the drama there.
But I don't believe in tenure in general, even in the public sector.
But you left academia for tenure. So
no, I didn't. I didn't. I left for other reasons. I actually started with a 14-month project in HRB, so I didn't.
So I think what is, one of the issues that we were discussing was funding and the current business model, to put it like this. And the way in which, at present, universities and UCD as starters look at business as something that they have to sponsor, whereas all the income of the universities for core and for so-called commercial posts comes from the state budget, meaning from taxes and from student fees, which means basically at present universities are funding businesses, but businesses are not necessarily paying back. Secondly, there is growing mobility. I mean, we're looking up to institutions that are not necessarily providing a good model for career development. Susan was mentioning Max Planck Institutes. Fact is that around a lot of Max Planck Institutes, which give grants for 5 or maybe sometimes to 10 years with 2 postdocs, there has been a growing nucleus of researchers who have stayed after first, second contract because of personal reasons and are and underemployed, and they become cheap teaching staff for German universities. That's in Germany, but that's very much the case here in Ireland as well. So at present, this career structure is not working, and whereas it is clear that having unreviewed and unaccessed permanent positions leads to a lot of, let's say, taken for grantedness within academia, I was defending the position that having permanent contracts and possibility of permanence in general is something positive.
And Maria, is there a good model, in your opinion? Is there a
I mean, at present, a lot of models are moving to more flexibility. This is not something that is specific to Ireland. I think for example, Eastern European countries were, for many years having permanent positions, and they have introduced internal evaluations that allow for some kind of renewal without suspending contract. Of course, their funding is really low, but these are institutions that are committed to teaching, first of all, so they're not necessarily, they're not necessarily only evaluated according to the ranking systems of, how much you perform on a global market of research and knowledge production, which I think we should take into account, because a lot of these rankings, which we are following very mindlessly here in Ireland, are really only evaluating research and publication. They're not evaluating teaching, they're not evaluating engagement with community. At best, they're evaluating engagement with business, but it's not even on one of their ranks. They're mostly targeting people in the STEM sciences and a number of prestigious awards. And this is within a global field of higher education that is extremely unequal when it comes to, say, north-south divisions.
But there isn't a model we can look to. All right,
I can look. I come from research in Venezuela, so I can tell you about there. But it is a matter of, are we going to follow rankings? And if we're going to follow rankings, which are the possibilities to do it in a meaningful way? I think we shouldn't. But maybe I would push the discussion in too far left political, direction. But in general, I think, say, the Bolivarian University of Venezuela, where I was doing my research, is trying to integrate, for example, social science component within all natural sciences in order to be able to understand the long-term implications of the science that is being done. And it is evaluating academics according to their engagement with communities and problem solutions. And that, I think, is very important to take in mind. And we're not taking that in mind. We are only following rankings here in Ireland.
Okay. Annalisa, Robert, and then Murs.
Just putting back my hat from the HRB on, instead of ex-researcher. I think to add about tenure, a potential problem that we have been discussing this morning. I think definitely there is a lack of career structure for scientists. I think with the IUA scale and the career structure, there is there. So it's there as we do PhD, you do postdoc, you do another postdoc, that there is the lack of the next level. So how do I become a PI? So that is partially between funding agency, academic department, hospital. So there is a different type of responsibility there. So how do we create the new leaders, and how we basically nurture the leaders that are already there? And another thing in terms of we're talking about clinical researcher or people working health research. Now we know that it's not just scientists. And we deal with people from different disciplines, from different professions. Very often the salary scale is wrong. It's very hard to attract researchers that come from medical doctor, from physiotherapy, pharmacists, GP. They are earning much higher salary in their clinical career. How can we attract them to actually do research and embed the research into the clinical practice? So these are the two things, and then the training of these people. So some of the training, and then of course I can see in the last 10 years in university funding agency, I think I put quite a lot of emphasis in the training that is necessary for these people. I think it's been much focus on the PhD training for quite some time, and now probably people and like UCD and many other organizations, Vita has done a lot of work, is the professional training of the researchers, not just the PhD training, and then you're just down there in the university do research without any training, but you're expected to lecture, to train PhD students, and so on. And then thinking as well that many of these people, for choice or their choice to leave academia, or for choice because there is no potential future for them, they are going to leave. So they need to be trained for the outside world to basically work in other areas.
Okay, Robert or Murs? Murs got a mic. Yeah.
I was just going to come in on the issue of rankings, and yeah, there's a danger of being slavishly sort of answerable to rankings, but wearing my last week's hat in a job. We did an awful lot of work in the higher education sector to seize ownership of that which we hold ourselves accountable for, in the context of concerns about the international rankings often put out by publication companies, global publication companies, generating churn just for interest. But like we developed in higher education a sort of an accountability framework where we had introduced clarity around national expectations and then transparency in respect of the performance or progress towards those at institution level and at national level. And yes, it's absolutely research and innovation are there, they're vital for our international reputation, but teaching and learning is there, engagement is there, civic and enterprise engagement. There's participation metrics because this democracy expects contributions to equality of opportunity for people with disabilities, people from underrepresented socioeconomic groups. So yes, in the global arena there's an awful lot of noise and presidents of universities get enormously distracted by them. But it's very important that the public interest is maintained around those and that the higher education system and the health system, that we own the accountability framework. And I think Hope and Health now will move to flesh that out and then get the indicators coming through about how well we're doing.
Okay. Thanks, Marisha. Robert, briefly.
Could I go to something you asked, which was around, has any country got this right, or is there any model? I don't think there's any one nation has really got this right. If you talk to people in Canada or the US, Germany or whatever, they talk about challenges in that. And if one is to take a step back for a minute, research is actually a relatively new undertaking. The kind of research that we are all involved in, multi-institutional, multidisciplinary, etc., about, what, maybe 40 years old, thereabouts. So previous to 40 years ago, you could be a Boole or a Boyle, you could go off into a lab and you could find something out, you could publish it. You were probably doing something else, but you might have gotten a professorship and you would have been left alone in the institution. You didn't really need that much money. We now recognize that research needs lots of money. And the challenge is building the business model around that. Research institutions, or higher academic institutions, don't do research for profit reasons. They do it mostly for institutional prestige. And if you talk to the senior management of universities, they talk about the liability of research, the fact that it costs more money than it generates, with all of the added issues around running buildings and all of that. In Ireland, SFI and HRB would give the highest overhead of, I think it's around 30%. And depending on the type of research, they will give a higher overhead. Many US institutions, their minimum overhead is 100%, and often it can be 120%, again, depending on the institution and that. So we need to move to a model that recognizes that research is actually part of our culture and part of our need for society. And then you allocate a budget against it and you cost it. You build in that you're going to be doing research, much like you're going to be having police, you're going to be educating people, whatever other activity that is part of normal life. And then you start to incentivize the best in it. And one of the models that I've seen that seems to work quite well is Cancer Research UK. It's not an academic institution, but they have decided on their priorities and their missions. And they long-term fund those missions. They decide that they're going to invest in key areas. They've just decided, for example, to invest in the preventative aspect in cancer research. So they've started out with a pot of money. They're letting the groups kind of come together and come up with the best ideas. And they will then make long-term commitments to that research, which allows people those that want a flexible career, to have a flexible career, but also that leaders can emerge with that. So probably what we need to look at more is mission-driven goals, perhaps, against the backdrop of recognition that it is something new. Nobody's got it right yet, but we all recognize that there needs to be appropriate resourcing of it. And resourcing then allows us to do things. Dolores mentioned some of the basic needs that are required if you are to train researchers. They're not actually about science. They're about management, they're about HR skills, budgeting skills, all of those other things that are needed in life on top of basic science. So it's around recognizing that research is core to what our society needs now, budgeting for that, and then trying to work out a mission that is consistent with that. That mission might be in cancer, it might be in a disease, it might be in the IT that underpins research, whatever it might be, but it's mission driven, and then you make sure you get an appropriate allocation of that resource to make sure that you can keep it going with a long-term investment. Research is not for short-term gain. Nobody goes into a lab a year and finds the cure for cancer. It takes decades.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we're going to have Gillian give us an extremely brief flavour of what came up at the tables. And if there are any outstanding questions or comments from the floor, you've about 5 minutes to think of them and get them off your chest. So then we're wrapping up.
Thank you very much. So I'm Jennifer, not Gillian. Sorry, Sarah. Okay. So I was going around and I was listening to some of the tables. I think, yeah. Okay. Just listening to some of the conversation at the tables, I think it was very interesting. I think what was very interesting is that the discussions seemed to be quite different at each of the tables. And so I've actually come up with a set of 7 different comments which were fed back from the tables. There was very little overlap. So just to go through, I think one of the tables brought up at the start that really, in some ways, we're talking about 2 different but very similar cohorts of people. We're talking about clinicians that are carrying out research maybe on a part-time basis, and we're talking about academic health researchers who are usually carrying out research on a full-time basis. And they are different paths, there are commonalities, but one of the main things that we need to think about is reward and recognition for the research that's been carried out, particularly for people who are in the clinical setting. Putting research into the job description for clinician researchers. This will require probably a collaborative agreement or environment between, say, the HSE and the HEIs, or the research performing organisations, where the researchers are doing the research. Maybe even some kind of an agreement between the HSE and the HEA, and I guess Mirish is best placed to look about that since he's just moved from one into the other. Another theme that came up was this idea of having dedicated researcher posts in the HSE and also upskilling the existing HSE staff to allow them and enable them to do research as part of their job. Another theme from a table at the back was about empowering PhDs and postdocs to take control of their own career, giving them the opportunity and a supportive environment to explore the different career paths that are open to them. And when we were talking about that down there, one of the things we mentioned was that for people who are considering a postgraduate degree, doing a PhD, at the earliest stage we need to be talking to them about what the realistic expectations of a career are, so that they don't kind of get into it and suddenly think, oh God, maybe I'm not going to be an academic, and how do I actually figure this out? That they know what they may end up doing at the end. The fourth thing then that was mentioned was making good institutional HR practices, such as the HR S4R Award, the HR Excellence in Research Award, mandatory for funding awards, which has been done in some cases in the UK. I think particularly for Athena Swan, which is the gender diversity. Some of the research councils in the UK have made that a mandatory requirement that the institution has this award. Another solution was funders to offer longer-term grants and fellowships, which would help to support researchers to get established, those maybe 5 to 7 years instead of the 2 to 3 years that are typical. And finally, I think one of the most important things that was mentioned was to have a proper research career structure, particularly in the universities, in the higher education institutions. That the government should realise that researchers should be treated as professionals, and they should, mandate and put through a proper research career structure which is approved by ministerial level. That should be complemented by appropriate learning and career development and careers advisory options for researchers within the HEIs. It should be funded by the research funders and implemented by the research performing organisations. And just one final comment that came from one of the tables is that maybe we should think about changing the language around discussing research careers, moving away from using very negative language to speaking in a more positive term. And this might actually help us to sell it to those who could possibly make a difference in this area. So thanks to all of you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Jennifer. Anything else? Anything people really feel the need to make a point about? Mary, anybody else? This woman here? Okay, I'm just going to take these comments and then
Thank you. I'm Mary Morrissey in Knowledge Management and also in the Royal College of Surgeons. I wonder whether in focusing on maybe patient service users and the public, how they are entitled to evidence-informed services. I wonder whether the panel could or whether we could consider how then, is there examples of where there are good structures that people actually getting a better service and are sort of safer in their health. I know that in the past I've worked in disability area that folks said, okay, well, service users are entitled to services that are well structured how can we ensure that that can happen?
Okay, I'm just going to take that as comment as a question rather than a question because we don't have time to put it back to the panel. This woman here.
Hi, my name's Sinead Pembroke. I'm a postdoc, the person everyone's been talking about in the room. I find that question, rather than asking how to make it more attractive for us, it's about, you know, you guys actually make it, you know, it's not we want to stay in research. So it's not about making it more attractive for us. You have to actually create the conditions. And by you, I mean the people with the power to do it in the various institutions that we've highlighted today. I don't think it's good enough to tell us that we can go into another career. You know, I think that's actually sidelining the issue. I think we're looking at research as existing in isolation. Research careers are part of a much wider thing of careers, and not just careers but jobs, and a much wider ideology at the moment going on of making our employment conditions more precarious. And what we should be doing is fighting against this precarity, admitting that, you know, it is precarity rather than saying we don't have a research career framework, and fighting against it. You know, and instead of seeing
stronger, more negative language rather than more positive language is what you're saying, which is a completely valid
I would
point.
like more positive ideas. That's what I would like, not about this idea of dressing up negative ideas with positive language. So flexibility, you know, dressed up, you know, precarity dressed up with flexibility. I don't.
Can I just say a quick thing?
Just no, I'm not. We're over on the floor now. Sarah Barry over here wants to come in, and then I'm going to, unless anyone else on the floor, I'm going to stop it there. Yeah, I'll let you in.
Thanks, Sarah. It just follows on from the previous comment. Jennifer mentioned positive language, so I was just going to throw it back to the panel and say, could you give us some examples of that positive language for selling this wonderful career to funders, etc.? Thank you.
I'm not sure we have time to go back to them, but anyway, this man here has a very quick point to make.
Quick one. Yeah, I think to getting both sides of the houses to meet, firstly acknowledging that a lot has changed. And I've been here in this country since 2006. I've been briefly out. I've done the mobility thing. I've done 7 countries in 15 years and back here. So things have changed. What we're calling for is not, I echo the comments that the colleague at the other table made. We don't need to be told there's no more space for all of you who got your PhDs. We know that before we entered it. What we're saying is it's great now we have up to the possibility of becoming senior research fellows in some of the institutions that have had the wherewithal to put in place processes to make that happen. There's a gap between that and the PI space, the ultimate PI space. And the European Commission has provided a pathway by creating the consolidated grants. What we're talking about is provide us the similar pathways that sit in hand in glove with what's happening in that space. And all of the rest that the EU mobility, including gender equality, paternity, maternity, all of that inclusive. We know that other careers exist. I think that's dressing something that we all know as obvious points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now,
just a very quick thing for the
like
postdoc
30
lady.
seconds.
Just a quick thing is that the institution, we say the university is the employer and the postdoc is the employee, but the funding is from a third party. So currently that is the situation. So it's very hard for the university to say we want to keep on employing you in this researcher when actually the funding is not from them often, and it's up to the researcher or the PI to apply for the funding. So that's just, it's a 3-party thing. It's not a normal employment situation. So it makes it difficult for the university to say we're going to give you another 5 years because they didn't actually have the funding in the first place. It was SFI or HRB. So it's tricky.
Okay, I'm going to give one last word to Maria.
Bringing back to our box-related discussion earlier, we were speaking that at present There are a lot of researchers that are appointed at university. Some of them do have CIDs. They have managed to fight it. And then there is a lot of overworked, there are a lot of overworked members of the permanent academic staff that are doing too much teaching and can't focus on their research. So there is a possibility for redistribution of this teaching burden so that these people are paid for teaching and not only for the research while they're also applying, you know, as an institution for the next funding grant. So this is not insoluble.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to let the rest of the panel off the hook because we've run out of time. And I'm going to just say thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to you for participating and hand you over to Jerry to wrap up.